Inspired by the True Crime podcast, this edition of Casefile invites you to solve the murder of famous botanist Dr. Paulina Green, found dead in a clearing near the edge of Pine Barrens State Park. Gather evidence, use the map on your tracker to retrace Dr. Green's last steps, and be the first to correctly identify the location, the weapon, the killer, and the motive behind the crime. Other detectives may plant false evidence. Focused on science first, Dr. Paulina Green could not trust all. Focused on solving the case first, you cannot trust anyone. There's a killer in this case who needs to be brought to justice. Will you solve it first? Famous botanist Dr. Paulina Green has made many enemies throughout her lucrative career, and her mysterious death has sparked an investigation spanning the entire Pine Barrens State Park. Now it's up to you to find out who killed her, how, where, and why. But you're not the only detective on this case, so use your wit and cunning to be the first one to solve it. First, the evidence cards feature 44 brilliantly unique illustrations depicting all the elements of the crime. The game contents also include a confidential folder, a deception die, a game board, along with a case tracker and a dry erase marker for up to 4 players. Place the game board in the center and give each detective a case tracker and a dry erase marker. One detective separates the cards into 5 decks: suspect, weapon, motive, location, and false evidence. The detective shuffles each deck, keeping the cards face down, and then takes one card from the suspect, weapon, motive, and location decks and places them inside the confidential folder. The folder is then closed and set aside the game board. All decks are then combined, shuffled, and 5 cards are dealt to each player. At this point, all detectives start by reviewing any false evidence cards they may have received and secretly marking the evidence cards in their hand on their case tracker. Each evidence card shows the type, the name, and the point value from 1 to 3. This number will matter later when players start trading evidence. The youngest detective will go first as the primary detective. The primary detective starts their turn by asking all players for 3 pieces of evidence. Usually, these pieces of evidence are things the detective has not crossed off yet on their case tracker. Let's say you weren't dealt a single weapon card in your hand. You might ask the other players only about weapons. Now, all other detectives can initiate a trade with the primary detective. To do so, the other detectives will provide the total point value of their cards, and the primary detective can decide to accept the trade by swapping cards of an equal point value. Here's where the trickery comes in. Do you trust your fellow detectives are providing the evidence you've requested? Or are they plotting to deceive you by trading false information instead? After all trades are completed, the primary detective rolls the deception die. This might force them to reveal a piece of evidence from their hand by checking it off on the game board, or, if they're lucky, they'll escape the round without having to reveal any evidence if they roll an X. All detectives should mark any evidence revealed in their case trackers. At the end of the primary detective's turn, all detectives should have a total of 5 cards in their hands. If 5 cards are in hand, discard 1 card face down and draw 1 new card. If more than 5 cards are in hand, discard down to 5. If you have less than 5 cards, draw back up to 5 cards. All cards should be discarded face down. The deception die then moves left to identify the next primary detective, and their turn begins. At the beginning of any detective's turn, they can attempt to solve the case. The detective takes their case tracker and circles the suspect, weapon, motive and location, and announces to the group their prediction. The detective can then open the confidential folder and look at the evidence cards without letting the other detectives see. If the detective is correct, they win. The detective then reveals the cards to the other players in the group and the game is over. If they guess wrong, the detective informs the group, but does not explain which piece of evidence they got wrong. That player is now out of the game and must put the evidence cards back in the confidential folder. The game continues until another detective thinks they can solve the case. If every detective is eliminated, the murder remains unsolved and the killer gets away. Remove all evidence cards out of the confidential folder to discover the details of the crime. With millions of different crime combinations, this game features infinite replayability as you try to solve the mystery of Dr. Green's murder. It's a game of truth and deception as you find out which of your friends you can really trust in Casefile.